Hello and welcome. We are live. This is Books and Beer. I'm Luke Richardson and I'm joined today by Michael Pronko, all the way from Tokyo. Wow, I think you must be the furthest away person that I've ever spoken to on the show, Michael. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, well, I don't feel far away, so
You don't look far away either. You could be
I
in the
know.
next room.
It's funny that I don't know how that works, but anyway, happy to be here today. That's great.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for making the time. So it's sort of 8, 9 o'clock in the evening for you.
Yeah, it's nine in the evening. Right. Yeah.
Perfect time for a beer then, in fact.
Exactly. I got one poured out here waiting for me. So
Good stuff. I'm going to crack mine open. I've got this one.
All right.
Which was a birthday present from Alison, who
Oh,
no doubt
cool.
will join us shortly. Thank you, Alison, for these. I've really
Well,
enjoyed
I'll
them.
run a short video on. I'm going the opposite way. Iwate Kura beer. So Iwate is one of the cities close by, and they just make a very lovely IPA. So
Nice.
all right, cheers.
Cheers, man. Cheers. So you mentioned, I mean, this is beer related rather than books related, but you mentioned Japan is the Japanese are loving the sort of IPAs and the craft beers.
Oh yeah. They're kind of obsessed with it, and right before the kind of pandemic slowed things down, there was just like beer place opening up all over the city. So, basically every station has a really pretty good beer place with fresh beer from all over Japan and the world too. Yeah. So
is that a new thing then? Is that like a new craze?
well, there's always been like Irish and British pubs, and they've always had good fresh beer, imported, direct, I guess, or as direct as it could be. So that's been there. And of course, there's Japanese beer. So, I mean, Japanese beer is just a thing everybody would have at the start of a meal or a night out. But these are really, places more like in the States, as I think of it, where you can go get a good pint of IPA from Oregon or Oregon style made in Japan. So that's been a real welcome addition, I would say, to Tokyo. So
I can imagine. Well, I've never quite made it as far as Japan, and it's certainly something I endeavour to do. I'd love to, but
yeah.
And reading one of your books and some of the other books that I've read based there just makes me. I love that sort of Asian crazy city. You know what I mean? The
Right.
glistening neon and the dingy back streets and the languages that I can't understand and the frying noodles and all these things that I've loved about other Asian cities. I just get the impression that the Japanese cities have that in spades as well.
Yeah, they really do, and it's Japan is far. I think it is like one of those cities that's on everybody's to go to list, but it is just a dynamic place, and it's just in constant motion, and there's just, and it's so big, it's so dense. So, there's just parts of the city that like I've never even been to, sort of, and like, what? I didn't know there's a garden for whatever special flower in that area or something, it's just like too much packed into one place. But that makes it really, really fascinating, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, really. And the culture and the history of the Japanese people is a fascinating topic as well. Not one I know much about, but, from sort of peeling the skin away from films and books I've read and things, it sounds.
Yeah, it is really interesting because you can really see the history in Tokyo, right? Going back to the Edo era and coming all the way forward, you just see all the different stages because, some of them don't disappear, they just linger on. And even though the city was always kind of made out of wood, so it burned down and was built up and burned down and was built up, so many things really remain, and the layout of the city really remains as it was. So that's a really kind of, fascinating thing as well. I like I just, it just intrigues me every time I go somewhere. There's apps for the history of that place. You know, it's kind of like, well, wait a second, I can't read through all this. You know, I'm just going to, you know, whatever, get this form or visit a friend, you know, but that kind of history is just there everywhere. So, yeah.
That's fascinating. And you said before we came on air that you've been there 20 something years, 27 years.
Yeah, 20. I think 24 now. Yeah, yeah.
Gosh.
And I was here a couple of years before then. Went back and then came back again.
And where are you from in the States? I assume.
I'm from Kansas City.
Right.
So smack in the middle. You can't get more in the middle. In fact, in the middle of Kansas, they have a marker for the middle, you know, but they also have a marker, I think, in South Dakota or somewhere. So, but I'm not sure which one is. But yeah, heart of America, they always call the area. Yeah. Yeah.
What took you there originally then?
To Tokyo? Well, you know, friends and money, I guess. I don't know. I mean, just, you know, it just seemed so interesting to me. It was just so different. And I'd been traveling around the world after college, and I really liked that a lot. But, you know, when you travel with no money, it's like,
well, that's the challenge, isn't it? Not the traveling, it's affording the traveling.
Right, affording it. Exactly, right. You know, there's only so many, like, you know, dormitories and things you can sleep in. But so I had a couple of friends.
Overnight buses. They're the killer,
overnight buses. You know,
if
I never get on.
If I go on the bus, I don't need a hotel. And you're like, well, yeah, but then I'll feel crap for 2 days as well.
Exactly.
You know, on top of
Yeah. Well, when I was 25, you know, I was kind of okay. But like now it's like just the word overnight bus kind of makes my neck hurt, you know, just to say that sort of. But I love traveling around, and, you know, I just was kind of fascinating to me to see all these different places, and places that, you know, just were so different from where I grew up, and so different from the States, really. And so kind of finally settling in, I guess I've settled in Tokyo. You know, it really is like traveling every day, you know, because of course you get into your routine, and I've eaten here before, and I took this train line before, but, you know, if you just step a little outside of that, it really is just like being in this unknown environment all the time, which is the feeling you have when you travel, right? So
do you think, and I wonder this about myself often, how closely my being a writer is linked to my love of travel, and whether I could do one without the other? Because I know a lot of writers who aren't into traveling, and I know a lot of travelers who aren't into writing, but for me, I can't seem to separate them both, because essentially all I'm doing when I'm writing is sort of taking the reader to a place like I've gone to the, you know what I mean? Like I've gone to the place and experienced it. It's the same process to me. Do you feel that about your writing and about the stories that you tell?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Yeah, I know from your work, you know, you're traveling and looking at this place, and it kind of turns itself into a story. It just, it manifests itself as a story, right? And yeah, I feel that way myself very definitely, right? That writing is kind of an adventure, an exploration of an unknown place. And to me, that's just really exciting. And, you know, of course, I love my comfy spots, you know, in the world, but, you know, places I've been to before that I've gone, you know, a bunch of times. But to me, like, writing is really, you know, pushing yourself out of those comfort spots and looking for something that's really new and very intense, I think. And so I see that as a very, very similar process, right? The you know, kind of planning a journey to an unknown place and figuring it out, where you're going to go, where you're going to eat, where you're going to, you know, but to also be alive to not knowing where you're going to eat. Or, you know, in the old days, like, you know, there's no internet. So when you traveled, like, you just hope the hotel was kind of there still, right? And sometimes it was, and sometimes it wasn't. And, you didn't have a reservation at a place or something, So I feel those are very, very similar processes.
Except obviously in the writing, you sort of amp it up to 11, don't you? In one of our travels, you hope the worst thing that might happen is you get to the hotel and it closed down 2 weeks ago and you have to go back out on the street and find another one. Whereas, with our characters, they would do that, but being chased by villains with machetes or whatever it might be.
That's right. Yeah. So you kind of ramp up that, intensity of experience and what confuses you and sets you back, But I don't always see traveling as so smooth or comfortable. I find it really kind of unsettling in a way, and
totally.
in a good way,
Yeah, totally. I often, whenever I've booked a trip, not that it's happened in the last few months, before I go, I have like a couple of nights where I don't sleep properly. I'm a bit like, what happens if this? Should I? Because once you step on the plane, that's it. You're gone, aren't you? It's almost as if like, it's almost as if like there's a turning point. You're there and then you're not. And obviously every time I've got back fine, there's been no issue. But there is the play, but actually I think it's supposed to be. I think travel is supposed to be like that. And I think our modern sort of perception on it, with transfers included and Wi-Fi in the hotel, has lulled us into a sense of security which isn't real. Actually, it's a sense of security which is false.
Yes, I think that's right, and I think that kind of being outside of Wi-Fi is kind of really unsettling, because we get so dependent on it, and we're so dependent on knowing that the muesli is on the bottom shelf on the left, and you go to a country where there isn't any muesli, and you have to start kind of improvising and looking around and seeing what's on the menu that you don't really have a clue what that is, sort of, So, but I think that's really good for you, because it keeps you sharp in a sense, or it keeps you kind of flexible and very, open to the environment, and all of those things, which are again important to being a writer. You have to be flexible and in the moment and aware and kind of ready for, whatever kind of pops up that you've just put down. It's like, wait a second, I didn't want to go there. Well, okay, let's see, So
that's true. I always say to people when I'm sort of helping them write a place, describe a place, is you should make notes within the first couple of days of being there. Don't wait until day 5, 6, 7, 8, because by then you've become used to the differences and you won't notice them anymore. It's the fact, if you get there, you'll notice that the tram or the bus or the train is a different color. You'll notice that the noise that thing makes is different to what it does at home. You'll notice that it's 5 degrees cooler or hotter, whereas in a week you'll have got used to those changes. But just note them down, because they're the sort of things that in a book that I think really stand out to me. And I know, having read one of yours, that actually those details are there. Those sort of crisp details are there, and they give it a real strength, a real believability, if that's a word.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, and it creates an experience, right? Not just words on a page or a description or something. You can, it conjures up that same smell, the same taste of things, the same kind of sounds of the place. And I think that's very, very similar. And I often do that when I travel, is just sit down and just journal out all these things, because there's so many things that just you can't experience where you normally live. And those things are really, really powerful, and they get you, they kind of get to you unconsciously. So you don't notice it at first. You just think, man, this is weird, but but it's really those details which are weird. Like, I
Mm.
can't see in this place, or why is this painted blue, or
Yeah.
what, like, how would anybody find their way through these streets? There, how could you make streets like this?
This is
But
it.
all of
Or the
the
street lights are the other, or the traffic
right,
lights are the other way around, or something.
right,
Whatever it
right.
might be. It's a really silly
Yeah,
little detail that means
silly little
that
details.
is nothing, but to the reader who's been to that place, it is everything because it
That's
shows
right.
that you've done it. And people notice
That's
these
right.
things, and I love it when people message me and say, "Well, actually, you've got that wrong."
Mm,
I have one from my book Hong Kong.
mm,
They were in Kowloon, in the
mm.
Kowloon part of Hong Kong, and the taxi color, the taxi that picked my protagonist up was the taxi color from Hong Kong Island, not from Kowloon. And someone messaged me and said, "Well, you wouldn't have got a blue taxi in this part of the city because they're not licensed in Kowloon."
Right,
I was like,
right.
amazing. I'll change
Oh,
that
that's
straight
excellent.
away.
Yeah, yeah. But those little details, are kind of hard to put all in order, because you forget things and you get swept up in the writing. And so, I do often find myself just like stopping, and, I'll either have to Google it, or I'll, like, on the way home, I'll hop off the train and walk it, just to see, because, and especially in Tokyo where things change all the time. So, an area that used to be kind of ramshackle, standing, drinking bars, can be just swept away, and, building goes up, and, your details are gone with it, sort of, So, but yeah, but I like that. I like to check those little details, the feel of the wood, and the creak of the door, and
Yeah.
what's around next to it and stuff. That's just fascinating to me. So
It's great. It's great. I'm just going to put this comment on. Hold on. Here we go. Alison says, "Thank you for introducing me to Michael's writing. She's just finished The Last Train, which is the one I've read of yours, and thoroughly enjoyed it. Looking forward to reading more."
oh,
So
great, thank you.
The Last Train is the first book you wrote?
Yes, that's the first in the series, and so there's been 4. The 4th one just came out last month, end of July, I guess. Tokyo Zangyo, and The Last Train was the first one, but it's the same detective or group of detectives in each one. So they come back each time, and things get more and more tricky for them. Although the first one, she was pretty tricky. But yeah, so I'm not sure how many more will come out, but definitely a couple more. Yeah. So
like it. And when did you start writing this then? The Last Train.
The Last Train. Well, I had worked on it off and on for a really long time.
I know.
And, kind of incredibly long. And but it was always it wasn't top of the list. I'm a teacher, so that's, they pay every month, kind of. So, I tend to
be
show
underestimated, is it? The power of actually getting money for stuff.
Yeah, that's right. So it's easier to show up when you know they'll pay you on the 20th, and then I also was writing a lot. So I wrote for like magazines and newspapers, and wrote editorials, and I had a column about kind of the foreigner's point of view of Tokyo, and wrote about art and architecture and different stuff. So I was really, and they paid as well, right? So, so I was really kind of busy with those, and I worked on this novel off and on, maybe almost 10 years, I guess, before it came out. Yeah. So, but then I thought, no, I'm going to get serious and really crank down, and I kind of pushed aside some of the other writing gigs, and let a couple go, and then really focused on that. And so I wouldn't say it took me 10 years, because there's like a year or two in there where I wasn't working on it, but the idea of it had started 10 years before, right? So that's a long time.
That first novel is a real mountain, isn't it? Because you just can't see the top from the bottom. That's the problem. So you've just got to go at it through the snowstorm of the process, and feeling out each step as you go, without ever really knowing where the end is or what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, there's just all those things, all those variables that you don't know how to do, and you don't know if they're working once you do them, kind of, And so you got to really, just push yourself through, gut it through, but again, that's a kind of interesting thing, to build up the skill and build up the confidence and to kind of build up, the sense of what do you want to say, because what you think you want to say at the beginning isn't necessarily what you really want to say, or that, you end up saying, right? So all of those things, man, that's just a lot of hard work to get that first one done. It was tough, very tough.
And I think the one issue I had with my first book is that I was trying to make it quite meaningful. And in many ways, it didn't need to be meaningful. It just needed to be a great story that grabbed the reader by the sort of neck and pulled them through this story. And actually, I was trying to make it this guy. It almost had elements of sort of travel writing in it, because it was not based on a trip I'd taken, but been to places I have done. But I'd forgotten in a way about what makes a great story, and that was the most important thing.
That's right.
It's a tough one. It's a tough balance. That sort of, I always find that balance of story and telling the place and telling what you want the person to come away with at the end of reading it. But
you can really get tripped up by the details because you love the details. I mean, I'd rather, I'd sit and describe this,
this
bar
for whatever.
I'd give it another 2,000 words if it was up to me. But that's a lot to ask of readers to look at that, and and it's fiction. It's not practice describing a room or something. So you have to kind of be sure all the details fit into the flow of the story itself, and contributes to it and doesn't distract from it. But I think that's very hard to get that balance. I mean, I usually, and that's part of the reason with the first novel it took so long, is like I just overwrite. Everything is too long, and then I cut and cut and
the color
cut.
of the concrete is like smoked whatever.
Right. Yeah. And I end up describing the texture of the grilled fish for 10 sentences. You don't need 10 sentences. Everybody knows what grilled fish skin is like, so so it's that kind of thing that I think is really, really, really hard. And in the first novel, all of that kind of comes together. You stumble over all of that stuff, and it's painful to cut things out too.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, particularly when you remember that, because when I was a teacher for several years, and I wrote my first novel sort of during that time, and I'd get up early and I'd sit there, I'd roll out of bed, sit at my desk, and I'd type out about 500, 600 words, something like that, before the sun came up, And then when you came to delete that a year or so later, it was like, I could have had a lie in that day. That's a whole morning's work or whatever it was.
It is, because you remember the amount of time and kind of the suffering it took to get those 500 words out, and how much of your life, you kind of didn't do something else in order to do that. But I think that's also what kind of creates the meaning of it, and it becomes meaningful because even the things you cut out are sort of like, wow, okay, I'll leave it there. But, I did write that, sort of that kind of feeling, right?
That's it.
So,
That's it. So tell me about your protagonist then, your main character in the Last Train and the following novels.
Yeah, well, his name is Hiroshi Shimizu, and he's kind of Japanese. He's in Japan, but not of Japan totally, I suppose. He grew up in Tokyo and went to school partially here, but he also went to Boston for college and a degree. And his parents had died when he was in college, so his uncle kind of became, in charge of him and sent him basically to Boston to get his schooling. And so he's kind of an outsider, but he's Japanese, but he's still sort of, outside of the ways of Japan. And so things strike him as a little like, why do they do things this way? That kind of feeling. So he's outside in that sense. And then he's also an accountant. He's not really a detective, but he gets hired because, murder and money is always kind of closely connected, and they need somebody who can read English to interface with, police departments elsewhere, but also somebody who knows accounting so they can kind of follow the money trail. So he gets kind of dragged in that sense, but he's not I don't know what. He's not a typical detective, I guess. I think that's fair to say. Yeah. So
I like it, and I enjoyed reading about him or from his perspective because a lot of American and European writers who write books in Asia or wherever, myself included, use a British or American character to do so, and I think that's quite easy because you can basically put yourself in that situation and look at it through your eyes, and your eyes become their eyes essentially. But what you've done is perhaps a lot more difficult, and I think that's perhaps because you've been there for a length of time, but you've sort of used a character who is, as you say, from that place, but they've had this time away, so it's given them that element of, it's almost like yourself in reverse, I suppose, because he was there, then he went to the States, and now he's back for work.
Well,
is that a challenge to do it that way around?
Yeah, I get confused sometimes, like about the point of view, but it is like you just said, which is I kind of think of it as if I was back in the States, looking at the States again. How do I feel about that? So I have that kind of cross-cultural confusion a lot. And that character is a little bit based on some of my students. When I first came to Tokyo, I taught a lot of students who had lived overseas when they were young. And so they had been kind of yanked out of the Japanese system. They were taken to Hong Kong or London or New York or Alabama or Ohio or wherever, and kind of, with their parents forced to go to school in Ohio for 5 years. And when those students came back to Tokyo, they were just very, they didn't fit in as normal Japanese, quote unquote. So, in Japan, that's more upsetting than it might be in other kind of, mixed cultures, right? So it's very monocultural here. So I really used a lot of, what my students had said to me about being Japanese, but not feeling Japanese all the time. And so sometimes they kind of bonded with me more than with Japanese teacher, because they'd been outside of Japan during their kind of teenage formative years. So I think the detective Hiroshi is that kind of person, right? He's a little lost between cultures, but also has a greater perspective because of that, right?
Yes, and I had that perspective reading the book, in that
Hmm.
that made him very valuable to the police force, because
Mm.
in fact the book deals with the death of a foreigner, doesn't it,
Yes,
in Tokyo. So
that's
essentially
right.
he's like the go-between, because he understands,
Right.
he sees both sides of the world, both sides of the thing.
Yeah. And a little bit, I suppose that's my role here at my day job teaching, which is always kind of to interject the foreign perspective
Mm.
at the university, and to kind of, say, well, this is fine to do it this way, but in America, we also have this other way of doing things, can we kind of meld those somehow, so there's that. And also I think Japan has been tremendously influenced by America, not only because of the occupation, but you know just the influence of American pop culture. And there's always Americans here at the bases, military bases. And so there is this real, like, I don't know, I wouldn't call it symbiosis, but some sort of relations between Japan and America that's very clear. And so, many people kind of step outside Japan for learning, I don't know, flamenco dancing or something, or
Yeah,
Italian cooking, or
and
pizza chefing or
real
something.
ale, cycling
Yeah,
back to
real
the start
ale,
of the
like,
conversation, like.
exactly. Yeah, one of my students years ago from Wisconsin had gone to Wisconsin to study beer making. And he went
Nice.
on, and he was really not a good student, but he was just had this thing. He was going to study beer making. And this was in the 80s, and he went on to Germany and became a brewmeister there with a certificate. And then one day on the train, this guy came up to me and said, "Are you Mike?" And I said, "Yeah, but who are you?" He said, "I was your student in Madison, Wisconsin." I said, "Oh, wow." And he had just done this thing. He had left at a young age and learned beer making in America, learned it in Germany. And then he came back here, right? And became a kind of advisor on hops. And wow, what an interesting life.
Yeah,
So he's kind of outside but inside at the same time. So that's the kind of character I wanted to have there.
I really like that. I think that's a great story as well. Really, really nice sort of thing. There's a brilliant book by a guy called Pico Aya, who also
Mhm.
lives in Japan,
Yeah.
called Video Night in Kathmandu, which I
Hmm.
thought was great,
Yes.
because my book's Kathmandu. I was like, yes.
Hmm. Yeah.
But he writes in this book um, about the infiltration of American pop culture in the 80s,
Yes.
which is a brilliant sort of study
Yeah.
but through his own travel adventures through that in that place.
Right. Right. He lived in Kyoto, I think, for a long time, and I don't know if he still lives there or not. I'm not sure, but he lived in Kyoto and wrote about Kyoto really in a beautiful, beautiful
He's
way.
got a great, wonderful. Not, I mean, not in the same way that you and I. They're not
Yeah.
thrillers. It's a travel
Yeah.
book, like a
Yeah.
memoir. So
It's
if you're
yeah,
watching
travel
this
writing.
and
Yeah.
think it's a thriller, it's not.
No. 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 No.
Luke
No.
recommended this book. It's rubbish. No one dies.
No. Right. Right. No death in his books. Yeah. Just
Yeah.
life. Yeah.
But no, it's fascinating. Yeah, I know. I like that, and that's what I really enjoy about your writing,
Mm.
and that's why I aspire to in my own writing, is taking that little bit of someone like Pico Iyer or another great
Mm.
travel writer, and adding it to a great thriller detective sort of plot. You know, what
Yeah.
what writers or stories would you say yours are inspired by, or did you look up to when you were writing?
Yeah. I never quite know how to answer that question,
I know.
because I kind of read in these two modes. I read a lot for, university
Yeah.
work. So, we're reading like Cormac McCarthy, and I guess the students were reading True Grit now, or, what else are we reading? To Kill a Mockingbird, I guess, this semester. You know,
American classics. Yeah.
American classics. Yeah. And so I spend a lot of time reading those kind of books and outlining them in detail, and then really spending a lot of time, you know, digging out the kind of you know, characters and symbols and things like that, just to stay a little ahead of my students when I can. So I read in that way, and then I also kind of always read, you know, for pleasure in just what I like to read. And so people like Elmore Leonard, you know, I mean, that's almost a cliche to say, you know, you learned everything from him, but he's such a kind of tremendous like energy in his novels, and you just start the novel and you can't stop. And other writers like Stephen King, I think, are like that, which I think is it I don't know how to say. It's great writing in its own way, right? And I don't mean that in any snobbish way. I just mean like, you know, everything has to be judged kind of according to its own merits, its own place. Yeah. Right. And so those kind of writers influence me a lot. But I really like, you know, like Cornell Woolrich and David, what's his name? David Goodis, these kind of 40s and 50s.
Yeah. Reading your book, I felt there was a sort of 50s detective element to it, almost Chandler or Hammett. Is it Hammett, Dashiell Hammett, that did
the right.
Falcon?
Chandler and Hammett, I've read all of those. I just love
it had
those.
that sort of smoky. Yeah, I can't really describe what I mean, but it's
it's very like film noir, like
yes.
You know.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of noir, that hard boiled thing, I really like that a lot. I don't know if I want to write completely in that style, but it has such a kind of energy to it and a real way of looking at the world and a kind of fearlessness to it that I really enjoy, and also I think is a really good way to look at the world, and also I think in that regard, like I think film noir really influenced me a lot because I love watching film, and I also teach film. I teach a couple of film classes. So the same thing that I do with the novels, I look at the films in tremendous detail, you know, outlining everything, which sounds a little crazy, but it really helps a lot when you're really trying to remember stuff.
And you notice how many people use that classic 3-act structure when you do that, don't you? You know.
That's right. Yeah, it's just part and parcel of the thinking. So those film noir, I just really love all of those film noir from the 40s and 50s. They're so powerful, I guess. You know, so I want to kind of take that element from them to use that, right? If that makes sense, right? So I think those are the main influences. I don't know. I read lots of other stuff, you know, just in bits and pieces, but kind of not so consistently. Like I'll hear, oh, this is a great mystery writer, and I'll grab that and read that, and then, you know, somebody will say, oh, the best thriller ever, and I'm just a sucker for that, you know, kind of. So when I get that, then I'll kind of, you know, jump in on that and follow through. So I'm not sure if it, I don't know how to say it. I'm not sure if it influences me, like one person influences me directly. I don't know. I always, like, every time somebody asks me that, I have to stop and think, and then I think about it for about 3 days afterwards.
Yeah, it's so hard to know. And ultimately, there is no answer, because I know it's a bit of a false question, to be fair, because I know from my perspective that actually I'm influenced by every trip I've been on, every book I've read, every person I've met along the way, and you know what I mean. All of these things filter
That's
in
right.
some small way, and you know, like some kind of giant, you know,
Yeah.
meat grinder, and you know, this tiny, you turn the
Right.
handle and this tiny slither of story comes out the
Right.
bottom, you know.
That's right. That's right. It influences you in such a kind of unexpected way, and a sort of like, I don't know, unconscious way, I think, you know. And also, one of the other funny things I always think is that you know, even though I write a couple of really grisly, awful scenes and tense, you know, aspects in the novel, I also really am, I think, influenced by comedy films, you know, and that seems so strange because it seems so different. You're supposed to, you know, pick a genre and stay with it, would you? You know, don't jump all around. But you know, like comedy films are very tense and uncomfortable too, and they're very, you know, they really kind of grab you and twist, you know, twist into you in a way. So I would say that, you know, I'm doing a class on comedy film this semester, and it's just something that also influences you. So if you take a comedy movie and turn it upside down, you know, that's a hard-boiled thriller, really, you know. So
Yeah, I've never thought about that. I suppose it's the thing, you know, the classic Shakespearean thing. Whereas if the character dies at the end, it's a tragedy. If they don't, it's a comedy. You know,
yeah,
like,
that's right.
the final scene. It just the same story, just that final bit changes. You know.
Right, right. Yeah, or somebody said it's tragedy if it happens to you, and comedy if it happens to somebody else, you know, sort of.
I
So,
like that.
you know, so, you know, if you kind of think in that way, it's really these story forms. And you know, if you can kind of know what those forms are, you can use those and play with them. You don't have to follow them exactly, but you kind of know how they work, and you know what would happen here or something. So I think all of those um, all of those different kinds of narratives have been very influential. You know, how else would you learn story except to just suck up as many of them as you can, sort of, right? You know, vacuum them up and put it in your head. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think you do those things. You follow
Hmm.
those conventions without even realizing it. Like you and I have
Yeah.
taught this, we know this, but writers that haven't probably still follow that beginning, middle, and end. That idea of, you know, conflict and resolution and climax and all these words
Hmm.
that you would throw into your film students or
Mhm.
your English students. You know.
Yeah, well, I think those things are guides and they're helpful. But you know, to get back to the travel metaphor, you know, you make your little plan for the day in this city, and okay, I'm going to Bangkok, so I'm going to go to this place and this place and this place and this place. But you know, it isn't even necessarily those places which are the most fascinating. It's the things along the road,
Oh,
or
it's the
the
tuk-tuk journey.
yeah,
You
the
know, along
tuk-tuk
the, you
journey.
know, that's always been one of my
Yeah,
favorite bits.
right. Or an argument you have over trying to buy something. You know, it's just anything. It could be.
Yeah.
You know, those are the really kind of fascinating parts of the journey. So
No, I hear you completely. Anya has sent says your books sound interesting, Michael. I'm gonna go and buy one, which is great to hear.
great.
We like to hear
Oh,
that
thank you.
people listening to this show go ahead and buy your books. And
Hmm.
Alison says that Tokyo sounds fascinating. It's definitely
Oh,
on her travel list, as is it on mine, Alison. 100%. Yeah.
yeah, it's a place to go to, really, Tokyo. And I also love Kyoto too, which
Yeah.
is one of the most, I think, beautiful cities in the world. And yeah, definitely come and visit. I think they'll start to lift they didn't have a travel ban exactly, but they just made it really difficult to come. So, but maybe little by little that'll kind of lift, I think.
Yeah, let's
So
hope so.
hopefully.
Let's hope so. So you mentioned earlier you've got sort of two more or a couple more books in this same detective series planned or in some way intended?
Well, one is about 2/3 drafted.
Wow.
Yeah, but you know what drafted means? It means like the hard work's coming up, right?
Yeah.
Sort
So,
of,
but that is the first draft. That's written in full sentences.
yeah,
Like that's
yeah, yeah,
not
yeah,
bullet
yeah,
points.
No, no, not bullet points. I'm not afraid of fooling myself along the way, right? Just to keep myself going. Oh, you got a lot done today. There's,
Yeah. You
you
do
know,
that thing when you're reading it back through, and then it says add in
right,
fight scene or add in
right, add fight,
interrogation
exactly.
scene or whatever it might be.
That's it, exactly. Yeah. No, no, yeah, full sentences there. So, and I finally got the ending too. So that was like, oh, thank you, muses, for
You
that.
don't know before. You don't know the end before you start. You sort of discover it as you
Well,
write.
I know the end scene or where it's going to happen, but I don't always know exactly what it's going to be. Right. And so I think, like, things that I put earlier kind of change it, it twists it this way, twists it this way, twists it this way. So it ends up not quite going where I imagined it would go. But I think what I mean by an ending is that everything comes together, right? So I usually have like several threads, but I have no idea how those are going to be, resolved perfectly together as a kind of whole, right? So that's really hard, I think. But yeah, I have that. So that, I don't know. I hope by next summer, I'll have that all in place, and then that's about a wealthy mixed couple, Japanese American, divorce kind of, not divorce kind of story that ends or starts with murder. And then I have another one after that, which is kind of outlined, but a little bit more on the bullet point side of things. That is called Tokyo Sagi. Sagi is like scam. So in Japan, there's lots of scams. There are in every country for old people, right? But in Japan,
schemes, that sort of thing.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And because there's so many old people in Japan, that's a lot of people to kind of cheat out of their pension retirement stuff. So I have those two are coming, and then and then I have a folder of great ideas, sort of waiting for me.
Yeah, I know the feeling of those great ideas. I've got several, as you say, that just sort of pop
Right.
up at various times.
Right.
So how long does it take you, and sort of what's the process then from that idea that pops into your mind whilst you're walking home on a rainy Tuesday afternoon to it being out for sale, ready for people to read? What's the process? What's the time?
Well, I try to just get everything down and put as many notes down as I can, and I use a software called Scrivener. I don't know if you know that, but
I know,
but I love it, and it works for me, and I know writers who love it, and more that don't want to deal with it. But for me, it really helps me bring everything together. So I think all writers have that process, don't they? You do, I'm sure. There's a way of just kind of bringing things into, some sort of relation together so they can start working. And so I think that's a hard part of the process. I spend a lot of time trying to think about the characters and taking time to kind of flesh them out. Who would they be? What are they like? Where did they come from? Hours trying to get their names right, that kind of thing. And
Before you put pen to paper, before you actually sit and start the actual drafting process.
Yeah, I would do those things first. Right. Right.
I quite often find that with names especially, I'll have like a placeholder name. And I have the
Yes.
main characters done, but so and so, it just becomes Ben or Chris or someone, and then I'll go through at the end and something will occur to me. That's a much better name, and they'll come through at the end.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And then for Japanese names, probably shouldn't
that
say
must
this,
be a
but
challenge, must it?
yeah, it is.
Because they must have. I assume they've got the same meaning as a British or American name. Some are common, some are uncommon, some have got working class or
yeah. That's right.
Tribe sort of histories or whatever.
Exactly. And then they also are written in kanji, right? So Chinese characters. So you've got to take that into consideration, because even one name could be written with different characters, which is a totally different meaning, right? So that doesn't come across in the English, of course, but I still think about that, right? Mm-hmm. So like Hiroshi Shimizu, Hiroshi is a pretty common name, and there's many different characters for that. But Shimizu is like clear water, right? So, maybe people don't know that, but it's like important to get that right, yeah. And then I don't know, bring all that together. I try to put all that down, get the files, and then I tend to think in scene. After thinking of characters, I think in scenes, and so I can usually just imagine a scene and kind of work that out, and imagine another scene, and then I should put that here, or it'd be great to have a scene where they're running along the train or chasing on the train, or this station would be a great place for a fight, that kind of thing. So I try to choose those scenes, in really important places or interesting places, and put that there. And then I don't know, and then you just got to wake up one morning and start putting the sentences.
That's the thing. That's the thing. I've got a book, Istanbul, which will be my next one.
Oh, great! That sounds
I've got
nice.
Riga almost finished, so I've got to finish that, like do the final tweaks and whatever's. But then the following one, and there will become a day. At the moment, I'm like, no, I've got to finish this. But there will become a day where I'm like you. I've just got to sit down and I've got to spend 3 hours a day in front of the computer and just write the bloody thing. Stop planning it, stop thinking about it, just do it.
That's it. Yeah, you just have to kind of be straight up with yourself and just say, okay, well, everything else is going to be set aside. I just got to sit down and, that's always a tough moment, I feel. But I like that too. I like to get into that flow and get into the story, right? So that's something that's really fascinating. Istanbul is a great place to have, something set. I really love Istanbul.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. Should be. My intention was to go to Istanbul. I've been before, but to go and write it there. So to go and spend a couple of weeks. Probably 3 or 4 weeks. So it wouldn't write the whole thing whilst I was there, but at least write a good chunk of it. I had this idea of sitting on a balcony, or on a rooftop sort of terrace, with my laptop, looking over the spires and the domes of the old city with the glistening Bosphorus in the background, writing the first half of the book with sort of the museum coming over. That was my vision anyway. I don't think it's going to transpire in that way because I won't.
Well,
the next few weeks,
not at the current state of world affairs, maybe, but that's okay too. That's okay. Yeah, memory is so important, and especially places like Istanbul, which is like, pow, it's such a powerful imprint on your sensory, side of yourself, right? So
it is. It'll be great. And Alison asks a question which I'm interested in as well. What's the strangest research you've had to do to build up your characters or your stories in your books? Now, I'm interested in this because quite often we see in Japan, in the UK, and I wonder if it's the same in America. And I think they do it a bit of an injustice, actually. They sometimes show like Japanese traditions as a bit kooky and a bit weird. Do you know what I mean? There's like this idea that all the food's like bugs or like snakes or something.
Yeah.
You see a celebrity there eating this
Right.
horrible thing. I'm like, don't show that. Show something really exciting or something really, enlightening, as opposed to this kooky, weird tradition.
Yeah.
No, or eating bulls' testicles or whatever it might be.
Right.
But anyway.
Right. Well, I did have whale testicle once, but that was that was another thing altogether. But like I think there's some things which are kind of in the flow of life. And one of the things I've also really learned from my students over the years is that, they don't live in that weird a way. They're not like living in some strange, bizarre way, or, they'll also say, yuck, I would never eat that, And that's like, oh, okay, well, I ate it a couple of times, but, I didn't like, So I think there's, I think that a lot of those articles are kind of, tend to be produced by people who have a deadline and want to kind of, get attention. But I think, the role of a novel should be to kind of show that flow of life that people have and what they do. So like in my last novel, one of the characters who's lost her daughter, she runs a flower stand, right? Which is a very common thing in every big city, but in Japan, I think especially, flower shops are kind of, dotted everywhere. You can't walk home anywhere from a station and not pass a flower shop. So, that's kind of more representative, I think, of Tokyo, a little flower shop, than I don't know,
any of the things we've discussed,
right, right. And I'm not afraid of putting in a kind of odd comment about, I don't know, sexuality or unfair treatment of women or bad attitudes by people or out of date, this, that, and the other. All of those things I think are here, but
and in every country.
Exactly. But what do you foreground and background? That's a really crucial point. If it's kind of there in the background as part of lived experience, it is there, but you don't want to, oh my God, can you believe? It's ridiculous kind of, right? So yeah, I do try to avoid that. But what's the strangest thing? I don't know. I try not to do. I did more strange things when I was here, when I was younger, before I was married, in case my wife watches this. But I think the strange things are kind of also normal things, like, I don't know, like standing bars. There's a lot of little standing bars in Tokyo where you just kind of go in and you have your space right here. I mean, literally, this is your space, shoulder to shoulder. And, those kind of things are pretty weird, and a lot of people have, kind of strange sides of their characters. So I try to always follow up on those things. And when I do need like special research on things, I contact people and I'll get in touch with a Buddhist priest or a dominatrix or a hostess or something like that, but it's more like they're people, and they're living their life, and that's just even more fascinating to me kind of than you know, how could you work at that job? You know, but you can, you know, because people do that, right? Sort of.
I think this is it, isn't it? Our jobs are, there is a sort of social commentary element to what we do. Whilst it's fiction, it's not created in a bubble. We're inspired by it, as we've been describing, you know. And as you say, just looking at these people, or even just seeing them on the street. You know, I remember sitting one night in Hong Kong and sitting in this bar and watching the prostitutes wander around and to get a client and take them in this dingy little backstreet door, and then 10 minutes later they'd appear again on the street. And just the way that happened, you know, was with such sort of
nonchalance.
Nonchalance. That's exactly it. And, you know, and for me, I was like, is it appalling? Is it? I don't know. I didn't quite know how to. But then I was like, I shouldn't. It doesn't matter what I think. Actually, I'm just a tourist here. I'm a spectator. Like, you know.
Right. And what are you going to do about it anyway?
Yeah, nothing. I'm here for 2 days, and then I'm going somewhere else.
Exactly. But yeah, I think there is a kind of. I mean, I think, you know, mystery thrillers should be a little bit. They should be a little weird, you know. I mean, you know, there's weird things that happen, and you know, we want to know why, and you know, murder really is the weirdest thing that could happen at all, you know. I mean, that's the most horrible thing of all, and the strangest thing. So you know, those kind of elements, I think, are really important to put in, but not you know, not sensationalize it, right? You know, and that's a really tricky kind of balance thing, I feel like, you know.
Yeah. And I quite like that in your books, in that because it's not particularly sensational, because it's from the perspective of a detective who is almost, it's normalized to them because they do it all of the time. I remember the first scene, he's seeing this body that we realize has been pushed in front of the train, and it is describing the chunks of flesh lying on the tracks and whatever, in real sort of everyday terms, you know. Right.
Yeah, and the people pick them up with chopsticks, right, and put it away, right. And you know, but actually that scene was by chance. It wasn't intentional research, but I did come across a suicide there's still some tracks that run at ground level in Tokyo here and there, right? For usually for smaller lines, you know. So, you know, the crossing bar comes down, and then, you know, there's suicides from time to time, and so I came across that at one crossing, and I was like walking by, and I was like, wait a second, what am I looking at here? You know, and I kind of walked back and looked, and, you know, is that kind of like, what? You know, right? So a lot of those kind of things, I think, sort of happen, you know, at least for me, just by living here and you know, going out and you see things, and you know, as you say, just observation. You know, the train in Tokyo is one of the greatest places I do research, because there's just, everybody is on the train. Every possible variation on humanity is there, kind of, you know.
Yeah, love it. Michael, this has been fantastic. We've just talked for over an hour, I've noticed, which has flown by in a heartbeat.
Yeah, for me too.
It feels like. Where is the best place for people to find you and your books?
Well, I just got a new website up, which I'm really happy about. And that's Michael Pronko, my name, MichaelPronko.com. That's the best place. And then my books are wide, so they're in Amazon, but other bookstores as well. And my non-online bookstore friends tell me that you can get a paper copy if you'll wait a week or so. They'll order it for you from even the smallest bookstore in
Oh, fantastic.
Idaho. So should be available most places. Yeah.
Brilliant. MichaelPronko.com then. That's the
MichaelPronko.com. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you for tuning in at home. It's been great to be able to share this with you and introduce you maybe to a new author or an author you've heard of before.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure to talk with you. And I love all these questions, and just keep talking for another hour. It'd be great.
I know, absolutely. 2 more beers, let's do it.
Yeah. Enjoyed it. All right, great. Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure. All right,
I'll
take care.
See you back at the usual time for some more books and beer next week, and I'll tell you who that's with on my Facebook group shortly. Thank you.